Hi, and welcome to What the Phalange, the podcast where we watch every episode of Friends, discuss it, deconstruct it, and fan over it, one episode at a time.
My name is Quinn, pronouns zir or they, them.
And my name is Emily, pronouns she and her.
This week, we're talking about Season 1, Episode 2, the one with the sonogram at the end. Aired September 29th, 1994, written by Marta Kaufman and David Crane, directed by James Burrows.
In a continued effort to use our platform to showcase and encourage the diversity of the media we consume, today we're recommending the podcast Gilmore Guys.
Recommended by a friend, Marta, Gilmore Guys features a dynamic duo taking on a task much like ours. They go through each episode of the 90s television show Gilmore Girls, one episode at a time. After wrapping up the season finale of Gilmore Girls, they've now moved on to the TV show The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
Before we start, we just want to give a quick shout out to Rachel, Alexi, Sid, and Laura, who promoted us and gave us some great feedback for our first episode. Thanks so much, friends!
Enjoy! Hello, everyone.
Hi, everyone!
Welcome back to What the Phalange.
What the Phalange with Emily and
Quinn.
Woohoo! Well, I like to call this episode the one where we meet Carol and Susan, the one where Rachel gives the ring back to Barry, and the one where Monica's parents are the absolute positive worst.
Understatement.
Of the year. Actually, Monica's mom is way worse than her dad. Her dad's not great, don't get me wrong, but okay, we'll get to that when we get to that.
We'll get into that. It opens up in Central Perk, and we have the quote-unquote girls on one side and guys on the other side. And they're kind of like dispersed. It's in the middle of the conversation. Emily, I feel like you had a few words to say on this cold open scene.
Okay, in a lot of ways I love this scene. Like, in all the ways I hate it, but also in all the ways I love it. I just find that this scene really shows the incredible writing capabilities of the team behind Friends. Because I find that the way that they've written kind of line by line by line by line, and this like weird metaphor that they created, and this weird story that they created in order to compare kissing and sex to like a comedian and Pink Floyd. I just think it's written so well, but yes, I know, it's awful in a lot of ways. Don't get me wrong. I just think it's really well written.
It's like content, kind of medium, quality, excellent.
Yes, that's exactly it. Yeah, maybe we can unpack a little bit like our issue with the boys versus girls kind of conversation. And this is a trope that comes up a lot in Friends. Like, the girls have to teach the boys what girls are thinking, and the boys have to teach the girls what boys are thinking. And it's usually, like, drenched in sexism and stereotypes and awful to watch. And you kind of watch it, like, I remember watching the show and being like, do men really think that way? Like, that is awful.
And I find that really interesting because I very much relate to you in that, where it's like you're young, you're impressionable, and so you hear these things and you kind of assume that maybe that's the reality out there. Despite the fact that, like, we had some pretty amazing male role models in our life. Like, our dad, not at all like that.
Shout out to Charles-Henri Brunet.
Father's Day.
Yeah, that's true. We're launching this on Father's Day. Shout out to fathers on Father's Day. Or good fathers on Father's Day.
Anyone who fathers.
Yes.
Open statement.
Yeah.
Anyone who falls under that category. Anyway. I think that that's just interesting because that like just drives home how media and pop culture can be so impressionable. And it's like we grew up with, like, I would say that, you know, our dad and Uncle Paul were two like main men in our lives who are both just not that.
I just like learned from a very early age not to trust men because of pop culture. Like, I just find that like a lot of... Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of other reasons not to trust men. There's just, like, I find that there's a lot of tropes in pop culture. It's not even 90s. Like, I'm watching New Girl right now, and they have the same kind of conversations. And it's just this, like, obviously men think in this, like, dirty, sex-only way. And then, you know, girls are, like, the more sensitive ones who need the kissing, whereas boys are the ones who need sex, and that's just boys will be boys, and they're testosterone-y and blah blah blah, like men are men, you know? And I'm sick of that.
Yeah, and I think what's also particularly unfortunate in this scene is that I would say that this is not a proper portrayal of Ross, because he is a character in the entire show. The ongoing joke is that, like, I mean, from the first episode, where he just wants to be married. Yeah. He wants to be in a committed, loving, secure relationship. He's the long-termer. He wants that intimacy and that security. Mm-hmm. He's the one out of all of them who is obsessed about long-term stable relationships, which is usually something that's depicted towards like a woman stereotype. And so it's just interesting that they'll take those characters out of their actual persona and have like take these qualities away from them for certain scenes. And this is something that like we'll see again further on. Suddenly, even though Ross's character has this pattern of being kind of sensitive and really wanting long-term relationships, and then having these conversations, and then once he's part of the boys, he just agrees with them and just sort of becomes this misogynistic kind of
and that's also such a theme in television too. Men on their own with the women are like good men, but when men are like in locker rooms or just the boys, then they are true men. Like it's just that shitty locker room talk. But again, I love the writing of this scene. I just think that, like, Friends is a lot of, like, metaphors and similes, and, like, they're talking about one thing, but they're actually referring to something else, and they do that a lot throughout the show, and I think it's, like, a sign of a really great writer to be able to do that and do that well in a way that's not overly cheesy.
It's almost, like, very natural. Ross finds out he's gonna be a daddy.
So we meet Carol in this scene. She is being played by Anita Barone, who ends up only being in this one episode portraying Carol, because she then goes on. She leaves because she wants to find like a full-time role on a sitcom. And then we get replaced by the wonderful Jane Sibbett, who plays Carol for the rest of the show and who is amazing.
Yeah, I think she does a really good job.
Yeah. Anita Barone does fine in this episode, I think. Like, but to me, when I watch this episode, because she's only in this one episode, I'm just like, that's not Carol. Okay, I wrote in full capital letters in this. I wrote, why would you tell someone you are pregnant with their child while they are at work? Not valid, Carol.
Not cool. I didn't even think of that, but you're totally right. This is not the time or place.
Yeah, don't, no. That's not valid. Like, the only thing I could think of would be, like, if she was worried that he would become, like, angry or violent and wanting to, like, be safe in a situation, you know? But, like, yeah, but, like, even just, like, call him up, yo. Call him up on the phone. Don't give him a surprise visit to the museum that he works at. He didn't even know she was coming. Like, it's not even like, hey, I'm gonna swing by on my lunch break. Okay, I'm very upset about this. We'll keep going. Yeah. So we find out Carol's pregnant. That's kind of the end of that scene. And we move into Monica's apartment where, again, everyone's chilling. Monica's apartment is the chill zone. People practically live there even though they don't actually live there.
Except there's nothing chill about the space at the moment because Monica is super frantic.
Chaotic and twirly, to quote Phoebe.
She's specifically chaotic and twirly and not in a good way.
And not in a good way.
Yeah, I feel like so many people can relate to this scene.
Yeah.
The
mom's coming to see you in your own apartment scene. So you have to pretend you've got your shit together so mom doesn't destroy you or parents don't destroy you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then what further creates a little bit of chaos in the situation is Rachel losing her ring. I think the main theme for me in this scene is how much I love Rachel's skirt.
Yes.
In this scene.
Is that a theme?
Well, for me it is. All right. It's how much I love Rachel's skirt and how she's paired it with that kind of like pale green t-shirt that just somehow works. I don't know how she does that, but it worked. But then the second theme of this scene for me, or like things that stands out is how much it just makes me really want to eat lasagna.
But then they put their fingers all in it, and I don't want lasagna anymore. But like that's like COVID-19 Emily talking, because like I don't want anyone touching any of my food at all.
But it would also be a really fun tactile game, you know.
We have different game interests. You can play your games, I'll play my own games.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's also in this scene that we get the wonderful return of the word "doi," which is a great word. And to quote Chandler, he says, "You don't get a lot of doys these days," which is true, you don't. And "doi" is a great word. And I just made a Facebook post the other day with "doi" in the Facebook post. And so when I heard Chandler say "doi" in this episode, I was like, excellent.
Excellent. This is also the scene where we are first introduced to the ugly naked guy.
Yeah, brutal.
Yeah, I feel like there's not enough in this one episode to really start unpacking their relationship with this character and how this character is portrayed. Mm-hmm. What I do want to take a note of, just because it's interesting little trivia for this episode, they were watching the Three's Company episode where, oh no, I'm going to forget her name now, but the main actress that you actually see on the screen there, she was known for her Thigh Master commercials, like being the one in the Thigh Master commercials. And it's just interesting because then it switches over to them introducing an ugly naked guy across in the building across that they can see, and he's using a Thigh Master. And I highly doubt that was coincidental.
Yeah. Good call. There is some things that are said in season 3 about Ugly Naked Guy in a flashback episode that you don't know until season 3. So let's not say it. So you gotta stick around.
Yes.
Until season 3.
We've got to stick around until season 3.
But there's just, maybe we'll get to the fat phobia later on, because Friends is like chock full of fat phobia. It's just everywhere, and so we get introduced in this episode to the fact that Monica used to be, to quote her dad, chubby, and had no friends. And there's a lot of association, and whether it's like explicit in the ways that they are literally shitting on fat people, Monica being fat, in this episode, and any form of weight gain at all. Like, they have an entire episode where they're trying to have Chandler lose weight because it looks like he gained like 5 pounds. And that just like is a trope throughout this entire show, is like, so yeah, whether they're being like explicit and like literally shitting on quote unquote fat Monica because they call her that, or whether it's like not as clear in the ways that like anyone who's ever in a bigger body on this show either is like a villain or obnoxious or rude or like quote unquote quote white trash. Like, they just like anyone who's above a size 2 is no one they associate with.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. And this is like the very first starting of a hint of especially being like critical of people for the way that they look. And it's
comes back a lot.
Yeah, this is the beginning of that theme, essentially. That's going to keep coming forward, and we're going to have to keep deconstructing together, guys.
There's a lot. Yeah, so we get introduced to Ugly Naked Guy. We also, like, if you've already watched this episode because you're listening to this podcast, but you'll notice that Chandler, Joey, and Phoebe are really just secondary characters in this episode. Like, they're just there for comedic relief, and I think that as the show evolves, they really create plot points with all 6 characters. So there's like a story attached to each character. Whereas in this episode, Rachel has her story, Ross has his story, Monica has her story, and then everyone else is kind of just like there for commentary, which is not very often that you see an episode like that when you get to later seasons. A little burp. So then Ross enters, and we get the second high of the season. I almost want to keep a running tally of all the times Ross says hi in that voice.
That is such a good idea.
All right, we're gonna know by the end of 10 seasons how many times he says it in this voice.
Okay, maybe we do that. We'll add it into our Instagram account on highlights.
Excellent. Great. So Ross, validly so, is freaking out about the baby situation. And it's really cute here because you see, like, Ross explains to them, he's like, you know, Carol says I could be as involved as I want, but, like, at the end of the day, you know, I'm still gonna be a father. And then Phoebe's like, oh, I love Carol.
She's so great.
She's so great. And you're like, yeah, Carol, you are great. Like, Carol's just, oh.
But so also great. Not necessarily the most appropriate time to say that.
Yeah. Yes, no, Phoebe, you're right. But yeah, I find it interesting because I see why. But Ross was nominated for an Emmy for this episode, and I think that you can really see that in this episode because his acting is incredible. And like Ross, and this is something that like if you've watched the show like 8 billion times, one of the best things that I do now that I rewatch the show is I like listen to the audio, but I like watch Ross's face. I know that sounds funny, but Ross has like really good reactions and facial expressions, and he's just really like he acts with his body, I find, and his face a lot in a way that I don't find the other characters do as much. And so I think it's cool.
Yeah, he's not just reactionary. David Schwimmer is definitely a really amazing actor and just really embodying his character at all times. And I do actually feel like Jennifer Aniston is the other person on the show who does a really good job of that. That they just create a character that's very multi-dimensional and very human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when you said that Ross actually won an award for this episode,
he didn't win. He was nominated for an Emmy.
Yeah, so he was nominated. It's funny because in this episode, I just kept on thinking about like, wow, he did such a good job. Mm-hmm. The little like face twinges, the little like hand movements, the pensive face, you know, like just a little like eyebrow twitch here and there. It's just, it really all makes a difference, and you can really feel kind of the processing that he's having to do in this episode, which is very relatable.
Well, not personally relatable, to be honest.
Well, not the specific topic, but
my
like
partner come and tell me that that she's pregnant with my child
at work.
Brutal. Other thing that I want to mention is kind of the shittiness in the way the men react to Carol being pregnant. Chandler says a shitty line, and Joey says a shitty line. And Chandler says the line, well, you know, the biggest part of your job is done. And then Joey says, yeah, and the most pleasurable part. And like...
Vomit.
Yeah. And like, that sucks. Like, that is just like... And then the women have to come in and be like, let's comfort you, Ross, as you like process the fact that you're gonna be a father. And like, it's just like, come on, dude. Like, you guys... Like, and you guys are better than that, you know? And I know that sounds weird, but like you see the way they support each other a lot in this show. And like, I just find that that's like such a not fun way to support someone who's finding out that they freaking like that's a rough, Ross is having a rough day.
Ross is having a rough day. I also find it really interesting, just to relate it back to a note in a future scene, where here we have Chandler and Joey sort of stating that like, his job is done. He just made the sperm. He inserted the sperm. Mm-hmm. You can wipe your hands clean. Like, that is the extent of what being a father is. Yeah. And then you fast forward to the scene where they're all sitting around trying to talk about, like, names and who kind of has the rights to the baby. Yeah. And you have Ross, who is basically making claim on more status on the baby based on his production of sperm, than someone who is committed to being a full-time parental figure for this child. And he hasn't even expressed that he is 100% certain that he's doing that yet.
Yeah, he hasn't even like been like, hey, I'm on board, let's do this. And in fact, in that scene, maybe we can jump right away to that scene.
Yeah, it's a good scene.
Yeah, because in that scene, like, we also have him say, like, he literally like almost leaves. Like, he's almost done.
He's not committed at this point.
Yeah, and, like, that's shitty. And, like, I can understand the humanness of that process and being like, I don't know if I can handle this. But, like, it's also super fucking easy to get someone pregnant and then be like, see ya, I don't want to be involved in this. Like, not having that emotional attachment to, like, the fact that your child is being birthed. Like, Carol can't walk out of that room, you know? And, like, Susan wouldn't walk out of that room. And, like, I just...
And then, yeah, but then also putting...
Reproductive rights, yo!
Yeah, and then also putting that into the context that I think is missing in this. I feel like the show does a good job at kind of putting a glimpse... I mean, not that a glimpse is enough. A glimpse into alternative...
Styles of parenting.
Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I don't think they do a good enough job at sort of giving the context. Mm-hmm. And so here, we're looking at the fact that, let's say, Carol and Susan raised this child together for many years, and Ross had nothing to do with the rearing of this child. Essentially, Susan would have no rights for visitation if something were to happen to Carol, let's say.
Unless, yes and no, unless they did an adoption.
I feel like we need to look up, because like there were some cases in recent history that actually have changed that in courts, where your parental figureness in a child's life is more valid than necessarily like the actual genetic attachment to this child. But around that time, either it had just changed or it had not changed yet. And so I think that keeping that context of like giving the child the last name, like Susan's last name, is actually kind of crucial in kind of helping Susan have some like legal rights around the situation of being like, I am going to raise this child. I am just as much, I am just as much a parent. And that should something happen to Carol, that the child would not be taken away from Susan.
Yeah, for sure. I think like you could get around that which is often what happens like with step parents as well, in which they adopt the child in order to, but we also we should look up, we should have done this before this episode, but we should look up the legal rights of queer parents. But okay, side note, I also want to point out the fact that it is very common for lesbian couples, especially lesbian couples who both have uteruses, who don't produce sperm, to get a donor for sperm. And so Ross literally could have just been a sperm donor. Do you know what I mean? So, of course it's different because there's a relationship with Ross and Carol. And, like, if you flip the coin, I can totally understand Ross's frustration, angst, fear. And he even has that really, I think, great line where he's like, my way. Like, she's like, oh, he just wants to get his way. And then Russ is like, my way? Like, you think this is my way? This is not at all how I want to have a child for the first time, And like that, like, to me, I'm like, oh, that's rough,
Yeah, I find it's heartbreaking in every direction. I think that you can just really, especially the way that David Schwimmer delivers that line. Yeah. I feel like a wrench in my heart every single time I hear that, because again, going back to the roots of this character is that he wants a relationship. He wants a family. That's what he wants. And so it's sort of like being given to him in this way that he just does not want. Yeah. It's probably heartbreaking to him to have to relook at his entire life. Mind you, that's kind of what this entire show is about, right? Yeah. That like nothing is exact. Like you leave college if you went to college, and life does not pan out in any way that you had planned it to. But I think it's also interesting because, again, we're seeing this through Ross's lens predominantly, and so we're also not really shining a full light into the spectrum of like Susan's position in this, where I'm sure that Susan feels just as ripped off as well, because, well, not ripped off, but like that sort of sentiment, because the way that she probably also had her own expectations of what she wanted her family life to look like. Yeah. And it's like we said, it's really common for people to get a donor, but in this situation, they aren't able to just erase Ross out of the situation. Yeah. And now she's being attached to this person that she doesn't necessarily like.
Yeah.
And is being forced. And you can just tell that Susan is that. She is a long-term lesbian, has probably known her identity for a long time, and sees through Ross. Mm-hmm. She sees through the toxic masculinity that he or just without filtering doesn't understand, and therefore just subscribes to naturally. And she just sees through it, and she has to now see her child be raised with this person, you know? And then you have Carol, who...
coming into her identity in a lot of ways, and like also loves Ross. Like she and that's like something that's so key, is that she really loves Ross. Like, and that to me, like in a lot of ways, is so lovely. Like I love this. Like it could have been done so much better, but I just think that like I really love that this show introduces this kind of like tri-parenting dynamic in a way that's not just like divorced parents and stepmom, you know, because that could have also been the same trope. Like they could have done this without Carol being a woman. They could have done, not without Susan being a woman. Like they could have done this with Carol, you know, leaving her for someone else. But it just like, I find it really makes this story, I don't know, nice. It's just, I love, add all the gay characters, like, just bring in the gay.
Or are we queer and so desperate for representation that we're like, this is amazing!
Yeah, true. That's why Susan is forever my favorite character. But, okay, wait, let's just finish the OBGYN scene, because, this is the first time in the show, which, you know, it's the second episode, but it's the first Black character in the show with lines, and by lines we mean 2 lines. Okay, so it's not a lot, and spoiler alert, probably will be one of the few Black characters in this show with lines, who is also not villainized. Yeah. Friends has a lot of secondary characters that are BIPOC, but like very few.
A lot, I think, is pushing it, but yeah.
They have like, I think that they do have quite a few secondary characters, but like, they're not necessarily portrayed as good people. Like they're like extras in the background with one line or no lines.
Right.
Like they have diverse extras in Friends. They do. They have diverse extras, which is a problem, because it's like one of those things where it's like, hey, look, we have a diverse group of people in our extras, but like they have no lines, they're not significant at all. So like it just kind of reinforces the idea that you understand that real life in New York City has diverse identities, and yet your 6 main characters do not.
Yeah, and so recently we listened to that, I think, I don't know, it was some sort of behind the scenes interview with David and Marta, the creators, and they're talking about them casting the 6 main characters, and they talk about how they went through auditioning anyone and everyone, and that at the end of the day, this was the 6 people who made the most sense. And I just have a really hard time believing it. And not to say that they were consciously making that decision, but the reality is that there's so many talented BIPOC actors out there and comedians that it doesn't make sense that it just so happens that none of them worked, when we're talking about 90s television where very few people are a person of color on television.
Yeah. And I also think that like that's such a colorblind attitude towards it. Like it's like a very like it's the equality conversation versus the equity conversation, in the sense that like anyone could audition for this, but like not looking at the ways in which like how many people who even auditioned for it were BIPOC. It shows up all the time in our industry, like as yoga teachers, where yoga teachers are like, our yoga studio is for everyone, but no one is actively doing anything to include or create space for BIPOC in these contexts. So it's like,
or people of different, like with different body sizes.
Or different identities. Yeah, totally. Like, so it's like, you can say that, you know, we cater for all, or like, this is like, everyone can audition, everyone can be a part of this thing, but then like, you don't actually set up systems in order for that to be true, you know? And like, you know, we don't expect the creators like to dismantle systemic racism, but like, and honestly, I do have a problem in itself with representation, but we could get into that in a whole other episode, but like in the ways that like representation is not enough and there needs to be more, but it's also representation is also really important, and like, anyways.
And yeah, and I think that also just recognizing that, you know, you put two actors on a stage, let's say one is white and one is a person of color. The reality is that there is inherent biases that exist. Maybe they haven't worked with someone who is a person of color because we're extremely insular in how, you know, in like white people hanging out with white people, because we don't know how to create spaces where we, you know, people of color can actually feel like they can be a part of it.
And feel safe.
Yeah. And so it's just sort of like, then you put these two people on a stage, it's very possible that it's not going to work, because even just a white person just is like, oh, I've never worked with someone who isn't white like me. Yeah. And therefore there's no chemistry.
And I find it's not just a matter of bringing in people of color into your show. It's a matter of like doing it well.
Yeah. And I think that also going further is the issue starts with the fact that the creators, the producers, the directors are all white. Mm-hmm. And that's where the issue is. The issue is not that there is a lack of talented, you know, BIPOC actors out there. There's no lack in that department. Mm-hmm. The issue is integrated, I guess, like in the system of like that we don't have enough people being given money to make these shows that are not white.
It's just the system. It's just the whole fucking white supremacist system. And then at the end of this, like, OBGYN scene, Ross then hears a sonogram, or hears the heartbeat, and he decides he's gonna be involved.
Yeah. Which, yeah, and I mean, it is kind of cute, the way that they portray it, you know, him holding on to all of their hands.
Yeah. And
all three of them are holding hands. And there's sort of like a, you know, it's interesting. It's hard. It's unfortunate that it's portrayed through a white, cis, hetero man's lens, this dynamic. Mm-hmm. But it's also nice that it's sort of like, we're not shying away from the fact that this situation can be very hard. Mm-hmm. And it is hard to come down the line as well. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be a lot more to talk about in this realm. But it's nice to see that the show takes it on.
Yeah.
At the very least, although our standards are pretty low.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So at the same time that all of this is going on, so Rachel, like we said, has to return her ring to Dr. Barry Farber, who in the first episode is actually called Dr. Barry Finkel, which is a little mistake on their part. They didn't keep the proper last name going. And she is just the literal cutest in her cute little overalls.
Yeah. Rachel trying to not be dazzling and to not look good. Don't look too good, Rachel.
And then Ross even says that. Ross says that.
Yeah, that's true.
He's like, which is going to be hard for you. And you're like, that's true.
That's just a fact.
Yeah, and like Barry sucks. So
understatement.
Yeah, he's just not great. He goes on a honeymoon with his supposed to be wife's maid of honor,
which you also find out is her best friend. There was a reason she was the maid of honor.
Yeah, which sucks. And is not valid. And I don't care if Rachel left you at the altar. You don't go on your honeymoon with Rachel's maid of honor. It's just not valid in any way, shape, or form.
Well, I think it was also really interesting what you said before we started recording, that it inherently implies that something was happening beforehand.
Like, it's just, like, Mindy needs to cool it. Mindy's not a good friend here. Like, Mindy is a super shitty friend for doing this. Like,
yeah, and then also without talking to Rachel about it, And then going even further for Barry to just rub it in further of being like, oh, I'll stick my finger in my eye for Mindy, but I would never have done it for you. Yeah. And I'm just like, wow.
Way to dig the knife in there, Barry.
And twist a little.
Yeah, not great. All right, yes, that's pretty much the end of what we find out there, except, well, actually, if we jump forward to the last scene of this episode, like, Rachel gets her petty revenge, and revenge is sweet.
I feel like I'm not a super petty person. I think you're probably more petty than I am.
Excuse you.
I don't mean it in a bad way.
I'm pretty petty, yeah.
Yeah, you're pretty petty. But, like, but mostly more in your enclosed doors, like, you'll share your petty thoughts with me, or we will with each other. But I feel like there's a certain creativity aspect to pettiness that I feel like you have harnessed a little bit more than me. Yeah. And I just think that, as much as I'm not a huge fan of people acting on pettiness, I think that this
one's warranted.
So warranted, you know, it's just like, F you, Mindy.
Yeah. It sucks that, like, the insult has to be about their appearances because, like, that's, like, again, a very shitty trope. But, like, overall, petty and golden.
Yeah.
Key. And then the way that she, like, is like, okay, I know that was a cheap shot, but I feel so much better now. And she's just, like, the cutest. Like, I just wanted to, like, go and squish her cheeks. I was like, oh, Rachel.
I agree.
Because she's just, like, a little sweet muffin, you know? She's, like, just kind of sweet. Like, well, at this point in the show, she's a sweet little, she's quite sweet. And she's, like, she's trying to be fierce, and she's trying to find her footing. Yeah. But she's, like, very much, like, used to being kind of this sweet ball of energy in a way, you know?
Yeah.
Okay, and then we need to unpack Judy and Jack Geller.
Oh my god, yeah. Just understatement again. So many understatements.
Yeah.
Oh, it's such a good scene, and I will say that if there's a good scene to have the DVD version of, it is this scene, because the Netflix version or the streaming version that you can get does sort of like, you see her mom, Monica's mom, do these jabs here and there, but the DVD version does not cut out any of the little details of it.
Yeah,
and
so
it's
even
so
more,
good, to the point where it's like you finish the scene and you're like, oh my god.
Yeah.
You're just like,
it's so
done.
Cringy. It's also like, if this was a real scenario, like if this was someone's real parent, Monica should be in therapy twice a week. I almost would want to go into like a psychoanalysis of Monica and like her relationships with other people based on her relationship with her parents, because Monica's mom is brutal. And like it really explains a lot of like the ongoing joke about Monica's like stressfulness about cleanliness and orderliness and everything being perfect and within the rules and, you know, good all the time. Like, she's, like, so stressful about that. Like, she's, like, a high-strung person. And, like, well, duh. Doy. To quote Phoebe, doy.
Doy is appropriate.
Like, if you met her frickin' mom, man, like, at least she had the chance to leave a man at the altar. Like, whoa. Judy.
I think this is like another kind of interesting part of this show, because they do have certain parents quite integrated, especially Monica and Ross's parents integrated into it. And with all of them, you get to learn their backstory, and it really pulls forward. Like, they do very much link it to how they are in the real world as adults now, is very much based on their family dynamics.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, you're right.
And I don't think that's a very common thing in, especially sitcoms.
Yeah, in sitcoms, like, sometimes you'll get 1 or 2 episodes with the parents. Yeah, they are very much integrated. And, like, Jack and Judy Geller are, like, in the show a lot. Like, they come back a lot because they're both Monica and Ross's parents, right? And, you know, you see some of the other characters' parents, but they're probably the ones that are most entrenched in the whole show. And they're like, their acting is great and their characters are great, you know, like they're just really funny characters. I really love how like Monica is like trying to have Ross take some of the heat. I just think she's like, I know this sounds selfish, but like, are you gonna bring up the whole baby lesbian ex-wife thing? Cause that's hilarious.
What I specifically think is interesting, and I feel like because we can relate to Ross and Monica in the sense that Emily and I are siblings, and we have a relationship where in a sense it's sort of a team. We know how our parents are. Yeah. And we can talk about it openly, and we can work around that,
and we navigate it in social situations and stuff
together. Like yeah, and I just find that really interesting because that's so relatable to how Monica and Ross kind of navigate their parents together. Like they have an open dialogue about it, and what I find like one of the best, my favorite line from this episode is when they're all lying or hanging out in Central Perk.
Right afterwards, yeah.
Right after their dinner with their parents. And Monica turns to Ross and is like, I know we can't change our parents, but if ever we could, I would want yours.
Yeah.
And I think that's just such a good line because people can live in the same household with the same parents and have two very different experiences.
For sure, yeah.
And I think that that's something that a lot of people can relate to if they've openly talked to about that with their siblings. And it's just interesting because, again, it's this other portrayal of it that I don't think that you really get to see very often. Yeah. A very honest look at a family.
It's also in this scene, the Central Perk scene, where they're all, like, lying there after Central Perk's closed, that we find out, like, a little bit more about the other characters' backstories. So, like, Phoebe has a twin, which at this time on NBC, there was another show called Mad About You that Marta Kaufman was a part of creating. And Lisa Kudrow was playing on the show Mad About You as Ursula, a waitress on the show. And she's a secondary character in the show, but she's still on the show quite frequently. So the reason why Phoebe in Friends has a twin named Ursula, who is a waitress, is because who works at Riffs, which is the same restaurant that Ursula, the waitress on Mad About You, works at. They did that purposefully because the shows play one right after the other. So they wanted to, like, tie in Lisa Kudrow's role on Mad About You to Friends. So that's cool.
Yeah. They wanted to, like, give a reason why both characters exist in New York at around the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's great, for sure. And then we also find out that Chandler's an only child whose parents liked his imaginary friend
better.
And then
it's heartbreaking.
And then that's all we know. Yeah. And, like, we also find out more about how Ross is just, like, madly in love with Rachel.
Again, another great scene. His, like, trying to be casual, but then inferring, like, I never thought I'd be, here with you, with Rachel.
Yeah.
Leaning on my hand. And, like, the nervousness and the opportunity, despite, like, all of the hardship of his divorce. And, like, I don't know, it's just, you know, that one line, the intonation, how it's delivered. David Schumer, he killed it.
I don't mind Ross in season 1. Ross in season 1 is my favorite Ross.
It's all downhill from here.
It's all downhill from here. That's season 1, episode 2. But we always have to give so you gave your favorite quote award. My favorite quote is when Rachel's looking for the ring and she says, I have 2 actually. She says, I gotta return the ring without the ring, which makes it so much harder.
It's so good.
It's so cute and angsty. I love it. I love Rachel. Can we talk a little bit about fashion in this episode? Chandler's outfit in this episode, he's wearing like a pink button-up that has like vertical stripes tucked, and it's like oversized and tucked into jeans. And it's just bad.
It's just okay, I was gonna say
bad.
I was about to be like, wow, you liked that?
No, it's just bad, and I just needed to talk about that. And then there's also, like, when Monica's cleaning the apartment, and also when her parents are there, she's wearing, like, this V-neck vest that's white and, like, kind of silky looking. Besides it showing off her super developed, dope-ass triceps, it's just ugly. Just an ugly vest. But I will say that my favorite award, and we could argue differently about this, but, and I'm most likely always gonna give Susan awards when she's in episodes on this show, but Susan's outfit with like her kind of like shorts, it's flowery.
It's a jumper. It's like this shorts jumper that like...
It's like a onesie
with
jumper
a belt,
kind of thing, and it's a belt, and she's got like her white running shoes and her
with the white socks
with the
folded
white socks,
up there. Yeah.
And her hair is like really beautiful and curly, and she's just like, she's my gay icon. I just love her.
Yeah, it's a pretty great outfit. Mm-hmm. My favorite outfit, okay, I really agree with you. I really like Susan's outfit. Mm-hmm. Although, in rewatching this episode, I find that, so Ross stays in the same outfit the entire time, as though it takes place all in one day, or he has multiple collared Oxford jean shirts.
No, but not true. Because I wrote a note. He wears a vest on top of a colored striped blue shirt for dinner with his parents.
Because
he like
then
got dressed up for dinner.
Afterwards, he's back in his jean shirt again. Anyway, what I'm trying to get at is that he's wearing a jean shirt. Like, let's just pause for a second.
A jean shirt.
A shirt that is made out of jeans.
Hey, I also have jean shirts now.
Okay, fair. He's also wearing a tie.
Oh, I did not notice
with this jean shirt. Okay. So red tie. I never really caught the exact pattern of it. But he's wearing a red tie, and it's basically what he's wearing for the majority. And it's what he's wearing to work as well. Like, this is his professional shirt, like the same way that you would wear any collared shirt with a tie. And I guess this was like a 90s thing. But, and I'm not saying that I don't like it. I like the humor in it, and I also kind of just love it. I think it's great. I would never be able to pull that off.
I don't know if anyone can. I don't even know if Ross can. We could just have like a whole podcast dedicated to only the fashion in this show.
I know, right? I do want to go over what the results were from our Instagram account.
Yeah, for sure.
So
thank you everyone who submitted. We're like super stoked with the responses we've gotten so far from our first episode, which like we did not expect. We thought we were going to put out a first episode and no one was going to listen until like episode 8. And we've got people who are messaging us and we're feeling super stoked about it. So thank you so much. And thanks for participating in our Instagram polls.
Yeah, it's so exciting. But so far, we've, I kind of polled people on what the favorite line was. Best hair, Rachel got an 80% yes for best hair in that first scene in the cold open.
It's beautiful.
Where it's like in this bun and sort of hanging around her face. Love that. People's favorite moment by, I think it was 100%. Yeah. Was, it was a disagreement between, it was 80% for the moment where they're in the OBGYN office and they all see the baby or the sonogram, and they all kind of hold hands. So that was 80% for that one, but 100% voted yes for the moment where, like that really intimate moment where Ross comes out of the bathroom and he's alone, and he's like, where'd everyone go? And then Rachel leans her head against his hand.
That's cute.
Yeah, so cute.
So that's it for us, guys. As always, you can find me, Emily, on Instagram and on Facebook at Emily B Yoga. You can also find me on my website, www.emilybyoga.com. That's Emily with an I-E, so E-M-I-L-I-E.
And you can find me in the show notes, but also with the handle at Kanien'kehá or on my website, quinnkbrunet.com. So that's just Quinn. K as in kangaroo, BRUNET.com.
And as always, tune into our Instagram, WT Phalange, at WT Phalange, to stay up to date for this week's polls, for next week's episode, and so that we can get your opinion and maybe we can even give you a shout out in next week's episode. So let us know. Follow us on Instagram if you aren't already. And you can even send us an email at wtphalange@gmail.com. We're here for your questions and concerns.
Until next time.